U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says the U.S. is preparing for war with China. Germany's General Carsten Brewer, who is part of NATO, says Germany is preparing for war by 2029. The NATO General Secretary Mark Rutte says Europeans must prepare for war with Russia. The UK's John Healey says UK forces must become 10 times more lethal as the UK prepares for war with Russia and China. As the drums of war beat louder in the West, is Africa a safe haven for the diaspora? We want to look at 3 reasons why you might consider leaving the West as part of the diaspora. So let's get to the first one. The first one is the increased risk of conscription and civil unrest. Number 2, economic collapse and targeted surveillance. And number 3, the repeat of prophetic and historical cycles. Let's look at the first point, increased risk of conscription and civil unrest. So first of all, you've got to understand that whenever there is a major world war, and you do need to know, and we'll get to the third point in a while, because we're talking about the repeat of cycles, but whenever there is a major world war, conscription is something that takes place. I don't know if you know about what's going on in Ukraine, but many of the young people in Ukraine have been forced conscripted into the Ukrainian army, and a lot of them have either been maimed or have lost their lives. And if you know anything about conscription, it's normally beginning with a lot of the poorer areas in different countries. And so in places like the UK, that would be in areas where there are a lot of minorities living. Also, what tends to happen is there's an increase in national service programs. And we've got to understand the UK and Germany have already discussed bringing back or bringing a national service program, which they have not had for decades.
We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces. When we are being directly threatened by states with advanced military forces, the most effective way to deter them is to be ready. And frankly, to show them that we're ready. To deliver peace through strength.
The government has announced wide-ranging investment in the armed forces ahead of the publication of its latest strategic defence review. One suggestion for military readiness as global tensions rise has been the reintroduction of national service, which previously affected those aged between 17 to 21 and was ended in 1960.
Are more countries planning on reintroducing or introducing military service?
Yes, so short answer, yes, absolutely. Because you see, the story is after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the end of the Cold War, most European countries felt safe and peaceful times, and they suspended their military services. Then the annexation of Crimea happened by Russia. Then the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia happened, and most European countries changed course, invested more money in their militaries and spent more money for the militaries, and now we are at a point where we see Europe does not have enough recruits and soldiers. A high-ranking German military official, for example, said Germany lacks 20,000 active soldiers and up to 100,000 reservists. And that's why I think the question is not whether, but rather how Germany and other European countries will try to manage, get more people, and introducing the compulsory military service is one tool to achieve this goal.
So when you're talking about national service, we're talking about graduates going into national service or people who are college leavers going into national service. And that national service will mean that they will have to spend some time in the military. And then the next thing that might happen because of the preparation for war is there would be civil unrest within the countries as tensions begin to mount. Why? Because the efforts of these countries will switch from a normal economy to a war-based economy with rationing and all manner of things. And what tends to happen is, even if you're not a migrant and you are of color, a lot of the time outbursts will take place, and a lot of xenophobia takes place during these times as tensions mount in these countries. Why? Because everyone's fighting to survive, and so the blame has to go on somebody. Okay, so let's look at point number 2, economic collapse and targeted surveillance. During a wartime economy, a lot of things tend to happen. So you've got to understand the logistics for lots of things change. During the First and Second World War, as I said, there were rationing schemes where it was even difficult to get things like a bar of chocolate. And so things like chocolate in Europe became a luxury commodity. And there were different things that people were kind of trading on the black market, like wines and all manner of different things, and certain foods. Why? Because these things were not readily available in the market. Because when you go to war with a country like China, and you go to war with a country like Russia, things that they produce don't necessarily come to you. And also, as their allies begin to fight and different shipping ways are blocked, then it becomes more difficult for countries to sustain themselves economically in the West.
The war brought full employment to America. People had money, but there wasn't much to spend it on. Japan occupied the lands that had supplied 97% of America's rubber. German U-boats prowling the Atlantic reduced sugar and coffee imports from Latin America, not to mention oil shipments from the Middle East. American factories had stopped manufacturing civilian goods like washing machines and refrigerators. All that meant shortages and rationing, a new experience for Americans, but one that made feelings of national unity and common purpose stronger than ever.
What we also have to understand is when the economic collapse begins, and because the military is drafting different ones into its forces, a lot of the time the surveillance in wartime countries increases. Why? Because you get a lot of people who are trying to flee the conscription. And so a lot of things will begin to happen. And these days it's going to be even worse because it's easier to be surveilled. Why? Because we have people using mobile devices and email and so on and so forth. And so it'd be a lot easier for Big Brother to be spying on you to make sure that you enter into the draft and be sent into the meat grinder. And so we really need to think twice about how comfortable we're becoming, especially by 2029, as our children can easily be pulled in to the front line of battle. And if you think it's just going to be boys, you've really got to sit down and think again, because even our young ladies will not be safe.
Denmark is introducing compulsory military service for women 2 years earlier than planned. Danish women who turn 18 after July 1st this year could be drafted from 2026 onwards. Men and women must now take part in an annual ballot from which names are drawn if there are not enough volunteers for the army. Denmark has also extended the duration of military service from 4 to 11 months. In February, it announced it was increasing its defence spending by 6.8 billion euros over the next 2 years in response to the rising threat posed by Russia.
We're looking at the third point, which is prophetic and historical cycles are repeating. So about 100 years ago, a man called Marcus Messiah Garvey got up and began to preach a message in the United States about the repatriation of Africans back to Africa. He came out of Jamaica, and he was responsible for setting up different things, one of which is the Black Star Line, which didn't work out very well. But Marcus Garvey had a philosophy of Africa for Africans. And if you look in the flag of Ghana, you'll see a black star. And that black star is because Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was an avid student of Marcus Messiah Garvey. Now, what you've got to understand is this. There seems to be something going on where history seems to be repeating itself. So just as Garvey got up just about 100 years ago and said that Africans should go back to Africa, so it is that Ghana had some envoys that went to the US and to the Caribbean and all these places where the diaspora find themselves, and began to say the year of return. And I know some will say, oh, it wasn't successful, but I want you to understand that when these events were taking place, my personal belief is that it is the Spirit of the Most High drawing people out of danger. And so this is bigger than politicians getting up and saying these things. This is a prophetic move and a prophetic call that is repeating itself because I personally believe the Lord is trying to get his people into safety. And there are other things that are tied to this, but I'm not going to go into those things today, because we could get into the scripture and deal with things prophetically going all the way back from Abraham's visitation, I believe, in the book of Genesis. But let's move on for now. So, can we see a repetition? Let me give you another point to show you how much history seems to be repeating itself. Just before the Second World War began, Japan was in a trade and financial war with the United States. And during that war, and I'm talking about a trade and financial war, Japan got to the point where it was forced now to preempt an attack on the United States. Why? Because of the pressures that were mounting internally in Japan.
With the army bogged down in China, it was the navy who took up the mantle as Japan focused on its southern strategy instead. This began in earnest in 1940, when, in order to cut a key Chinese supply route, Japan entered the northern parts of French Indochina in an agreement with the Vichy French government. This worked in isolating the Chinese, but the US saw it as yet another act of Japanese aggression that threatened US interests in the Pacific. Coupled with Japan's recent alliance with Nazi Germany and Italy, the US responded by imposing an embargo on iron, steel and copper, all of which were essential to Japan's war industries and which were largely imported from the US. But the Japanese did not learn their lesson and occupied even more of French Indochina in July 1941 as a launch point for invasions further south. This time, the Americans responded even more forcefully.
So this time, the US responds by freezing all of Japan's assets in the United States, and this prevents Japan from purchasing oil. And right after this is followed up by Britain and the Netherlands, who control the Dutch East Indies, imposing oil embargoes of their own. So in one fell swoop, Japan loses 94% of its oil supply.
Japan was in a crisis. They first attempted to negotiate with the US, who demanded their immediate withdrawal from China and the Tripartite Pact. But for Japan, accepting those demands was akin to complete defeat. Unwilling to give up their imperial ambitions, the Japanese felt their only option was to seize the natural resources they needed by force. That meant striking further south into British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, who were both friendly with the US. Japan believed that this time the US would almost certainly respond to their invasion with force of their own. The Japanese decided then that they had to blunt that US response by attacking the US Pacific Fleet at anchor at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii.
Does that sound anything like what's going on between the US and China today? Because it seems as if history is repeating itself. It might be different players sitting at the table, but history is surely repeating itself. And so I'm going to quote from the late and great Marcus Garvey: Africa for Africans, at home and abroad. You've been watching the Intelligence Report, and it's time for you to make a decision and to pray. Yes, Ghana and all these countries might not be for you, those of you that have been schooled to be employees and schooled to use debt and credit in order to live your lives. But is the Most High calling you out of this type of bondage and slavery to a system that has you paying bills and getting up even in adverse weather conditions just to be on time for work, being crammed in underground trains and on buses and in different forms of transport just to arrive promptly at work so you can get that paycheck and be let out of work maybe once a year or twice a year as you book your holidays so that you can get away. So you're going to have to make the choice. Do you want to continue to live in an economy that's driven by debt? You buy your house and it's a mortgage, a word derived from the Latin and the French, mort, meaning death. So a mortgage is until death. You're paying for your house every month. And yet you can come to places in Africa and for some reason they manage to do business to the point where they own their own houses. Some of them even live in, how can I put it, in rooms whilst they're continuing to build and pay off their houses and hand them on to their children, whilst you might get your house taken away from you. Why? Because you didn't pay certain taxes. Oh, it's quiet. And do you want to continue to live a life where everything is credit? You're driving a car, it's on credit. You can't rent certain properties because you don't have good credit. You're wearing clothes that you bought on credit. You're sitting on furniture that's bought by credit. And then when you don't pay, the bailiffs come to the door, or someone's coming to repossess the car. Is this the kind of life that we're supposed to live? Or even if you do pay off all your bills, you're paying off all your bills every month and you are living to work for corporations and don't really earn enough to own everything that you have. And by the time you finish paying off for one thing, it is too old for you to continue to use. And so now you go into debt again so that you can keep up with the Joneses. I don't believe that's a life for you. I don't believe that's a life that you were born to live. We were not born to come into this world to be anybody's slave. We were born into this world so that we could have dominion. And I believe the Lord is calling a people out of the bondage of the West, where people have become the new age, what can I call it, indentured slaves, where they're earning thousands and their employers are earning millions. And some of the employers are even earning billions. And so the disparity of wealth has gone to the top, and the new levels of poverty are now folks who say, I have thousands, whilst others are saying, I have millions and billions, and even some saying trillions. Sit down and think. and reconsider whether life is better where you are, or if you could find a life on the other side that the Lord is offering to you. Do you know what? And I'm closing with this statement. The children of Israel, when they were coming out of Egypt, they had a problem. Their problem was they were used to the system of Egypt, but yet the Lord was bringing them to a land of milk and honey, a land out of which they could get everything that they needed. But in that place, they had to kind of be industrious to put things together. In the other place, they were in slavery. Ask yourself the question, do you have the mindset of bondage, or do you need to pray that the Lord gives you the mindset of liberty, so you, as part of the black diaspora, and I know there's people, you might be of other races, but you also need to consider this yourself, that you would be free. This has been the Intelligence Report. Please like and subscribe. And I've been your host, Dr. Joseph Opare. Catch you again soon.